Chapter 6 by Bus Through the Outback, Video 2 of 3. With every mile that we drove into the heart of this continent, the landscape around us became more and more a warm red. The red tones seemed to shimmer in the heat, and the sky above us seemed an unnatural blue. It was as if someone had painted it and had used far too much color. The contrast between the red soil and the blue sky was glaring. On the horizon a lake appeared, but this lake was without water, just the remnants of it. It was entirely made of a salt crust and shimmered white from the distance. Lake Ayers, one of the biggest salt lakes on this planet and the lowest point of Australia. At one time this must have been a big body of water, surrounded by jungle perhaps, but that was so long ago in time that not even the sand remembers. Ted parked the bus close to the shore. At least I thought it was close, but the horizon is deceptive in the outback. I thought I'd take a quick walk to the lake to touch the salt and taste it. But what I thought might be 300 feet away turned out to be a march of 2 miles. Once I stood on the lake, I realized it wasn't one sheet of undisturbed white salt as it had seemed from the distance. Instead, there were crusty, flaky slabs of salt run through by veins of dark red earth. It had its own charm, but from afar the lake definitely looked more impressive. It felt like standing on another planet, breathing air so hot it almost burnt my lungs. It was like drinking a hot tea too quickly and feeling my throat seared with pain. I closed my eyes and made a few steps to hear the crunching sound of salt under my feet. When I opened them and turned around, I saw the bus passengers waving at me impatiently in the distance. They looked like mice. They wanted to get on with their travels and not walk around on some dried-up lake. How I wished to make my own schedule and be able to wander around this crusty shore, contributing to the salt deposits with my sweating paws. But as for now, I was tied to this bus and had to obey. Goodbye, white wasteland. As I walked back, hearing my feet crunch the salt beneath, I felt so loud and clumsy in this sea of silence. The desert was a quiet, peaceful place, undisturbed by the chatter of voices that grew nearer and nearer as I drew closer to the bus. I had always liked the silence. I had always liked my own company. I had always found it hard to make friends. I had always struggled to bear someone else's company for long. On this bus there was no escape, and my little excursions were a much-needed breather for my overcrowded personal space. Another unexpected delight was a waterhole in the middle of the dry, dusty desert, a true oasis. Immediately we threw off our remaining, and in this heat, superfluous clothes. I jumped gleefully into the belly-button-deep wetness, but my delight changed into blind fear half a second into the bathing pleasure. My adrenaline level exploded to unhealthy heights when I felt my feet slowly sinking into what should have been the bottom of the waterhole. My feet, ankles, and calves had sunken into the quicksand below. I wondered why Ted, who clearly knew his way around, hadn't warned us of this. Or maybe he had, and I simply didn't understand him. The Australian dialect was still somewhat confusing to me. As it was, if I kept sinking at this rate, my head would be under water in less than 30 seconds. Good thing I had made a will before we flew to Australia. Not that I had much to leave behind, but I wanted to make sure people played the right song at my funeral. This would be a short-lived trip, I thought, but at least I would die a spectacular death. The water was up to my neck now, and I was ready to take a deep breath to prolong my life by a minute or two, when all of a sudden I stopped sinking. It's only a thin layer of quicksand, Ted assured everyone, and one by one the bus passengers experienced the eerie sensation of being pulled under by it. Quite fascinating, that is, if you only sink knee deep. We made camp about 100 miles from Coober Pedy that night and slept under the stars in swags. Swags are sturdy sleeping bags used by Australian cowboys when they drive cattle from one place to the next. Ted had packed these for all of us to enjoy the nights like a true Australian would. The stars were so unbelievably close that night. To this day, I have never seen them like this again. The canopy of black ink was infinite, no end and no beginning. The blackness was absolute. Within it, the stars were strewn like diamond freckles on smooth, perfect skin. They shone and sparkled with such clarity and vigor. Some sequin silver, some polar white, some molten gold. Some gleamed and glittered, some flashed and flickered, some twinkled and dazzled. They were not still, they were alive, moving. The Milky Way looked so close. It was as if I could stretch out my hand and pick one of the diamonds that were scattered above me and keep it as a token to remember the spellbinding composition of random perfection I was witnessing. It seemed like the cosmos was closer out here. The stars were the only lights within a 500-mile radius of placid darkness. Their lights were so pure, so bright, unpolluted by the illumination of human settlements. One felt part of the entire universe. It was like floating in a dark sea. Around you nothing, just stars above. The other people were non-existent. It was dark enough to put them completely out of my mind. Feeling so utterly small and unimportant, yet deeply connected to all things. Finding the faint beating of the universe's heart and rhythm with my own as I absorbed the vast darkness and scattered light of its canvas above me. But the spiritual moment was abruptly ended by the fact that I did not want to feel so connected to the creepy crawlies that had made their way into my swag. While I seemed to be calm on the outside, inside I was panicking at the prospect of sharing my swag with spiders and snake, like I had when I felt as if I was being swallowed by the quicksand. Thankfully, the darkness shrouded my hysteria, and even those who might have been awake did not see me frazzled by creatures as small as my thumb. I had never moved as fast in my life to get out of this swag. I shook it vigorously to make sure every living thing was catapulted to a safe distance and disturbed the complete silence with what sounded like thunder. Then I clambered back in, tied the swag snug around my neck, and put my newly acquired flynet hat on. I felt safe, but needless to say I was sweating like a horse. My magical night had turned into a sleepless, involuntary sauna. I was rewarded for the sleepless night with a breathtaking sunrise of bright lilac and gold over crimson earth, a wild combination of colors that would go together nowhere else but here, a painter's daring delight. I sprawled a little longer in the sand after getting rid of my hot and sweaty second skin and bathed in excited anticipation of soon-to-be-found riches. Today, we would become opal billionaires in Coober Pedy, the most famous opal mining town on this planet. We drove past what is simply called the dog fence. It is what it says it is, an extensive fence clawing its way 1,500 miles through the empty Australian outback like an ugly scar on an otherwise beautiful face. And why? to keep the dingoes on one side and livestock safe on the other. This isn't even the only madly long fence on this continent. The other one is called the rabbit-proof fence. At least the maintenance creates some jobs, I guess. But as a German, I almost have an allergic reaction to fences, walls, and other barriers dividing a country. Granted, those two fences were to keep pests out and not human beings, but seeing these disfigurements created by human ambitions just sits uneasily with me. A visual highlight and welcoming uplift from the fence's monstrousness were the breakaways. Ridges that looked like paper mache, another movie set looking scene that was so fancifully artificial in appearance that it was almost unbelievable that this wasn't man-made. Mother Nature certainly had fun in Australia and swung her paintbrush masterfully, tinting each and every hill of this ridge in a different color. Chalky white, saffron yellow, russet red, dusty black, deep periwinkle violet. Anyone who doesn't smile at this spectacle has no heart. Arriving in Coober Pedy, we discovered that there wasn't a town as such, at least not above ground. Most things were dug into the ground to withstand the scorching heat. The temperature 65 feet underground is a constant and comfortable 68 Fahrenheit. Above ground it rises to 122. So homes, shops, churches, just everything was underground. The entrance to those bunker-like dwellings were mostly found in little hills, a bit hobbit-like, but once inside I felt more like a Morlock. People really tried to make this inviting, but spaces without natural light just aren't. Needless to say, the residents of Coober Pedy were all a bit outlandish and extraordinary. The number one topic of conversation was opals. There was absolutely no one here who did not dig for them. I mean, why else would you choose to live like a mole if you didn't hope for prodigious riches in stone form? Everyone, resident and visitor alike, is infected by this impetuous fever upon crossing the town line. The need for the find is all-consuming. Soon after you enter Coober Pedy, you find yourself participating in this delirious dance around the colorful, shimmering stone called opal. All you want is to dig because you know your big find is just an inch of dirt away. Mum and I found ourselves willingly lapsing into this addiction. We targeted the spoil heaps of larger mining operations because, from what we heard, good opals can be found in those dump piles. The bigger players dig with dynamite and machines and often blast off the first layer of opal. That would be enough for us. We didn't think of financing our retirement. Just finding enough for this trip would be great. So we knelt in the dirt on stones so hot they were roasting our knees, with air so blazing you could barely breathe, and the horizon hazy, shimmering, unfocused with torridity. Our only tools were flat stones, perfect for raking through the dirt, looking for anything different than ordinary soil and stones. We weren't the only ones. Around us were many people who believed their treasures would be found close to us. When the heat got too unbearable to think straight, we went to sit under a tree and dug some more there. While we were digging under the only tree around in this Why we were digging under the only tree around is a mystery to me now. Surely every opal hunter sat under this tree, this rare shade dispenser, doing exactly what we were doing. So if there ever had been an opal, it had long been found. It wasn't much cooler under this tree either. but the mere idea of shade refreshed us. Water was running out of every pore. From a dermatological point of view, Coober Pedy was a very cleansing experience. Should they ever run out of opals, they could open up a big detoxing spa. Sadly, our finds were limited to a few little opals, not worth selling. Before Ted found us deliriously sitting in the midday heat and dragged us away. He had surely saved us from heat stroke and insanity. Once we were hydrated, our brains, and fueled our bodies with some nourishment, we decided that opals weren't worth the burnt knees and fried brains, and that we would move on with the group after all. In our dreams, we wanted to stay behind and become opal tycoons, but it was safer to leave the city limits to the next day before the addiction took hold. When I was showering at our underground backpacker to wash all this dirt from me, I finally felt what the heat had done to me in such a short time. I hadn't realized while I sat on my opal dump. Now I noticed that my head slowly stopped aching. I wasn't even aware it ached. My body slowly stopped pulsating, and my cracked lips sucked up every pearl of watery goodness that rolled down my face. The inside of my nose turned itself back to mucous membrane it should be, and breathing got a lot easier.